The darkness swallowed everything that night, no stars, no moon, just an eerie silence pressing down on the forest. A lone trucker driving through the Navajo Nation in Arizona swore he saw something impossible. There, in the glow of his headlights, a man, tall, gaunt, with eyes that reflected like an animal's, stepped onto the road. Then, in the blink of an eye, his form twisted, limbs elongating, skin rippling like water, until what stood before him was no longer human. By the time the trucker hit the brakes, the figure was gone, vanishing into the pines without a sound. This wasn't just a ghost story. The man insisted it was real, and he wasn't the first to claim such an encounter. Across Native American communities, whispers persist of beings who can shed their skin, transform at will, and walk among us unseen. These aren't just legends. Some believe these shapeshifters never left, that their cults, steeped in ancient rituals, still operate in the shadows today. For centuries, tribes from the Navajo to the Lakota have passed down stories of the Ye-Noldlushii, the Skinwalkers. These aren't mere myths told around campfires. They're warnings, rituals so forbidden, so dangerous that speaking their names aloud is said to invite disaster. But what if these tales are more than folklore? What if the rituals that created these beings never truly died out? Across reservations and remote stretches of land, reports of strange sightings, unexplained livestock deaths, and even human encounters continue to surface. Witnesses describe figures moving faster than any animal, humanoid shapes with glowing eyes, and voices that mimic loved ones in the dead of night, the common thread. These entities define nature itself. This video isn't just about legends, it's about the chilling possibility that shapeshifter cults, rooted in some of the oldest traditions on this continent, might still be active. We'll delve into first-hand accounts, examine the rituals said to grant these unnatural abilities, and explore why so many, from tribal elders to modern researchers, warn that disturbing these forces comes at a terrible cost. By the end, you'll understand why some doors once opened can never be closed. So steel yourself. What you're about to hear might change how you see the world and the things that move through it unseen. To understand the terrifying reality of shapeshifters in Native American lore, we must first journey back to their origins, rooted not in superstition, but in the sacred fabric of tribal life. For the Navajo, the Ye-Noldlushii, or Skinwalker, wasn't just a monster from a bedtime story. It was a violation of the natural order, a person who had chosen to wield dark magic by breaking the most profound taboos. According to oral traditions, these beings were once medicine men or women who twisted their sacred knowledge, performing unspeakable acts to gain the power to wear the skins of animals and take their forms. But this transformation came at a price, the corruption of their humanity, binding them to a life of malevolence. The Cherokee spoke of the Kalona Ialiski, the Raven Mockers, winged beings who stole the skins of the dead to prolong their own unnatural lives. Among the Lakota, the Wanagi were spirits capable of shifting forms, often appearing as loved ones to lure the living into danger. These myths weren't isolated. Tribes from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains shared eerily similar stories, each adapting the concept to their own landscapes and spiritual beliefs. But one thread remained constant: shapeshifting was never a gift. It was a curse born from trespassing into forbidden knowledge, a perversion of rituals meant to heal, not harm. Why did these beliefs persist with such intensity? Because they served as warnings. In cultures where harmony with nature was sacred, the idea of violating the boundary between human and animal was unthinkable. Shapeshifters embodied the consequences of greed, vengeance, or dabbling in forces beyond human understanding. Even today, many tribal elders refuse to speak of them at night, fearing that words have power, that naming these beings might draw their attention. The rituals said to create them were so dangerous that mere discussion was taboo, passed down only in hushed tones. Some say the oldest ceremonies required the killing of a close relative, a sacrifice so horrific it shattered the practitioner's soul. These stories weren't just about fear, they were cultural safeguards reinforcing values of respect, balance, and the sanctity of life. When a Navajo elder warns against walking alone at night, or a Cherokee storyteller describes the cold grip of the Raven Mocker, they're preserving more than folklore. They're guarding a line that should never be crossed, yet, as modern sightings suggest, that line might still be trespassed by those willing to pay the price. The question isn't whether these beings exist, it's whether we're prepared to face what they truly represent. In the heart of Native American spirituality, shamans and medicine men occupied a sacred space, both revered as bridges to the divine and feared as keepers of dangerous knowledge. Their abilities to heal, commune with spirits, and even alter their own forms placed them in a precarious position within their communities. On one hand, they were spiritual leaders, guiding their people with wisdom passed down through generations. On the other, their mastery of the unseen made them objects of suspicion, especially when rumors swirled of those who crossed the line into darkness. The transformation into a shapeshifter wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate act, a perversion of sacred rituals meant for protection and restoration. Among the Navajo, medicine men underwent years of rigorous training to harness harrowing, the concept of balance and harmony. But when that knowledge was twisted, when a shaman used their power to inflict harm rather than heal, they became unwavering. The rituals to achieve this transformation were shrouded in secrecy, but oral traditions hint at unspeakable acts, desecrating graves, consuming human flesh, or performing ceremonies under the blood moon. Some stories say the would-be shapeshifter had to wear the pelt of the animal they wished to become, stitching it to their own skin in a grotesque fusion of human and beast. Among the Apache, shamans known as Dian could reportedly call upon animal spirits to aid their people, but those who succumbed to corruption gained the ability to become those animals, often wolves or owls, using their new forms to stalk enemies or exact revenge. The Ojibwe spoke of midwiwan healers who, in rare cases, abused their connection to the spirit world, shape-shifting into malevolent beings called Wendigo entities driven by insatiable hunger. What's striking is how consistently these traditions warned of the same danger, power without morality. The very ceremonies designed to heal could be inverted, their steps performed in reverse, their prayers spoken as curses. A Hopi elder once described the moment a shaman turned as a rupture in the spiritual fabric. Like watching a river flow backward, the community would sense it, a shift in the air, an unease settling over the land. Livestock would vanish, whispers of a figure with too many teeth or eyes that reflected firelight would spread, yet these stories served a purpose beyond fear. They reinforced the sacred responsibility that came with spiritual knowledge. A shaman who became a shapeshifter wasn't just a monster, they were a cautionary tale. A reminder that even the most revered among us could fall, and that some lines once crossed could never be uncrossed. Today, when elders speak of these things in hushed tones, it's not just about the past. It's a warning that echoes through the centuries, urging us to ask, what happens when the keepers of light choose the darkness instead? Among the Navajo, few words carry as much weight as unwavering, the Skinwalker. To even speak the name after dark is considered dangerous, an invitation for something unspeakable to listen. These beings weren't just monsters in stories, they were once people, often skilled medicine men who chose to wield their sacred knowledge for evil. The transformation wasn't mystical, it was a deliberate, gruesome process. According to tribal accounts, to become a skinwalker, one had to commit the ultimate transgression, the murder of a close family member. This act of betrayal shattered the natural order, opening a door to powers no human was meant to possess. Witnesses described skinwalkers as masters of deception, able to mimic voices, manipulate the elements, and most terrifyingly, steal the forms of animals. A coyote with human eyes, an owl that flies backward, a wolf that walks upright. These are the signs that something unnatural is near, but their abilities go beyond mere disguise. Some stories tell of skinwalkers controlling minds, forcing victims to wander into the desert, or summoning storms to conceal their movements. Their presence is often preceded by an unnatural silence. Birds stop singing, the wind dies, and the air grows thick with the scent of decay. Navajo elders share chilling accounts of encounters passed down through generations. One tells of a hunter who followed what he thought was his lost sheepdog into the woods, only to realize too late that its paws left no tracks. Another speaks of a woman who heard her grandmother's voice calling from outside her hogan at midnight, though the grandmother had been dead for years. When she opened the door, the thing standing there grinned with too many teeth. Tribal police on reservations have documented cases of livestock mutilated in ways that defy explanation, bodies drained of blood, organs removed with surgical precision, and no footprints leading to or from the scene. The cultural taboos surrounding skinwalkers run deep. Many Navajo refuse to discuss them openly, believing that attention draws their malice. Traditionalists warn against accepting gifts from strangers, especially at night, as skinwalkers are said to curse objects to spread illness or death. Even photographs can be dangerous. Some claim that images of suspected skinwalkers blur or distort inexplicably, the most sacred protection against them. Bullets dipped in white ash, a substance believed to sever their connection to the spirit world. Yet few are willing to test this theory, for as the old saying goes, to hunt a skinwalker is to become one. What makes these accounts so unsettling isn't just the supernatural element, it's the underlying truth they reveal about human nature. The Skinwalker legend forces us to confront a terrifying question. How far would someone go for power, and once that line is crossed, is there any way back? While the Navajo feared the Skinwalker, the Cherokee told of something equally monstrous: the Kalona or Raven Mockers. These weren't mere spirits, but undead witches who craved the one thing no living person could give: more time. According to elders, Raven Mockers were once powerful shamans who refused to accept death, instead using dark magic to cling to existence by stealing the lives of others. They appeared as grotesque hybrids, part human, part bird, with long, tangled hair matted with blood and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. But their true horror lay in their ability to shed their forms, slipping into the skins of ravens or owls to move unseen through the night. Their preferred prey, the sick and the dying. Cherokee tradition holds that these creatures could sense when a soul was nearing its end, drawn to the weakening life force like vultures to carrion. They'd perch on rooftops or outside windows, their whispers mimicking the voices of loved ones to lure the vulnerable into their grasp. Once inside a home, they'd press their skeletal hands against the victim's chest, sucking away their remaining breath in a ritual known as Atsilajiviwalogi, the stealing of fire. Witnesses described the act as a horrific inversion of warmth leaving the body, a sensation like ice spreading through the veins as the Raven Mocker absorbed their vitality. Those who survived an encounter often spoke of shadows with too many joints, moving in ways that defied anatomy, or the sound of wings flapping inside closed rooms. The Cherokee developed intricate ways to ward them off. Families kept sacred herbs like cedar and tobacco near the sick, burning them to purify the air. Mirrors were placed facing doorways, as Raven Mockers were said to fear their own reflections, a reminder of the humanity they'd forsaken. Most potent of all were the Adevulg, or prayer men, who sang protection songs through the night, their voices weaving a barrier the creatures couldn't cross. But the strongest warning of all was never spoken aloud. To become obsessed with cheating death was to risk becoming the very thing you feared. The Raven Mockers weren't just monsters. They were a mirror held up to humanity's deepest weakness, the refusal to let go. Even today, elders caution against speaking of them too openly, especially near hospitals or burial grounds. Some swear that on still nights, if you listen closely, you can hear the faintest rustle of feathers against glass, a reminder that some hungers never fade and some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. Among the Lakota people, the Wanagi spirits were more than just ghosts. They were shape-shifting tricksters who defied the boundary between the living and the dead. Unlike the Skinwalkers, who actively sought power, the Wanagi were often seen as lost souls, capable of taking on familiar forms to communicate with the living. Elders spoke of encounters with loved ones who had passed, only to realize too late that their gestures were slightly off. A smile too wide, a voice just out of pitch. These spirits weren't always malevolent, but their presence was a warning. The dead should remain separate from the world of the living. Some Lakota ceremonies, like the Wiwanyong Wachipi Sun Dance, were designed to reinforce this balance, ensuring the Wanagi couldn't cross over. Yet even today, on remote stretches of the plains, travelers report seeing figures that flicker like mirages, human one moment, animal the next, before vanishing without a trace. The Hopi spoke of the Pawaka, witches who could shed their skins to roam as coyotes or owls, but their power came from a darker source, the consumption of soul essence. Hopi oral traditions describe the Pawaka as outcasts who, in their desperation, made pacts with chaotic spirits. Their transformations weren't seamless. Witnesses claimed to see their true forms flickering beneath the animal guise, like a shadow beneath water. One chilling account tells of a village where children began disappearing after dark, only for their toys to be found scattered near coyote dens. The Hopi response was pragmatic. Communities appointed Kikmangwi spiritual leaders to perform counter-rituals, using sacred cornmeal and turquoise to bind the witches' magic. Unlike the Navajo, who feared speaking of skinwalkers, the Hopi openly confronted the Pawaka, believing silence only strengthened them. For the Apache, the Dian shamans walked a razor's edge between healer and threat. While most used their gifts to cure illness or commune with animal guides, those who strayed could become Yinoldlushii, not unlike the Navajo version, but with a key difference. Apache shapeshifters were said to draw power from storms, their transformations accompanied by sudden gusts of wind or unnatural thunder. In one legend, a hunter tracking a wounded deer found himself face to face with a creature that stood on two legs, its antlers fused to a human skull. The encounter left him paralyzed for days, his muscles locked in terror. Apache elders taught that these beings were once protectors who'd grown arrogant, believing themselves above natural law. Their punishment, to forever hunger for the humanity they'd sacrificed. What unites these stories across tribes and generations is the idea that shapeshifting was never a gift but a corruption. Whether fueled by grief, vengeance, or greed, the act of shedding one's form was a rejection of the sacred balance. And while the rituals and warnings varied, the underlying message was the same: some knowledge withers the soul. Today, as modern accounts of strange encounters persist, these legends remind us that the line between human and monster is thinner than we'd like to believe. The question of whether shapeshifter cults exist isn't just a matter of folklore. It's a debate that stretches from ancient oral traditions to modern police reports. While skeptics dismiss these accounts as superstition, a closer look reveals patterns too consistent to ignore. Take the case of a retired Navajo ranger who spent years documenting bizarre incidents on the reservation. Livestock carcasses drained of blood with no signs of predation, footprints that abruptly shifted from human to animal, and even a chilling encounter with a figure whose face seemed to melt in the moonlight. These weren't isolated stories. Similar reports emerge from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, where Lakota elders speak of secretive groups performing inverted versions of sacred ceremonies to gain unnatural abilities. Historical records add another layer to the mystery. Early European settlers in the Americas wrote of witnessing rituals they couldn't explain, men draped in animal skins chanting in tongues, or dancers moving with impossible agility. One Jesuit missionary in the 1700s described a chilling scene in his journal: a gathering deep in the woods where participants appeared to share faces, their features shifting like wax. Of course, colonial accounts are fraught with bias, but they align eerily with tribal warnings about forbidden knowledge. Even government documents hint at something darker. Declassified FBI files from the 1960s reference an unsolved case on the Navajo Nation involving a series of mutilations, with a handwritten note speculating about cult activity and anomalous biological evidence. Modern anecdotes push the boundary further. In 2019, a group of hikers in the Ozarks recorded a thermal image of a humanoid figure sprinting on all fours at speeds no person could achieve. That same year, a Cherokee healer in Oklahoma claimed to have intercepted a hidden online forum where users traded grotesque recipes for skin-binding rituals. And in 2022, a viral Reddit thread detailed a first responder's encounter with a car crash victim whose injuries seemed to change shape under the ambulance lights. Are these stories exaggerations, hoaxes perhaps, but the sheer volume of cross-cultural accounts suggests something more unsettling, that the line between myth and reality might be thinner than we think. What's most compelling isn't just the sightings, it's the consistency of the warnings. From Navajo elders to Appalachian folklorists, those who take these stories seriously all emphasize one thing: secrecy is the cult's greatest weapon. These aren't gatherings advertised in the open. They're whispered about in back rooms, in the hollows of dead trees, in the static between radio frequencies. And if they do exist, their members wouldn't be the robed figures of horror movies. They'd be your neighbor, your coworker, the quiet person at the gas station who smiles just a second too long. After all, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that lurk in shadows. They're the ones that learn to walk in the light. In the quiet hours before dawn, a Navajo shepherd on the outskirts of Monument Valley swears he saw something impossible. His security camera footage, grainy but chilling, shows a figure crouched near his livestock pen, human at first, then elongating, joints bending the wrong way until it moved on all fours like a wolf. By the time he grabbed his rifle, the thing was gone, leaving behind only a single twisted footprint. A bare human heel pressed into the mud, toes fading into claw marks. This wasn't some blurry Bigfoot sighting. The man, a retired Marine with no history of superstition, sold his entire flock the next day and moved off the reservation. His story is just one of dozens surfacing in recent years, each adding fuel to the debate. Are shapeshifter encounters merely modern echoes of old legends, or proof that something far older and far darker still walks among us? On the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, Lakota game wardens have quietly documented a pattern of strange animal deaths since 2018. Cattle and horses found with their rib cages split open, not by predators, but with what one veterinary report called surgical precision. No blood at the scene, no tracks leading away, just a faint, acrid smell witnesses compare to burning hair. One night watchman patrolling near Badlands National Park reported seeing a tall figure standing over a fresh carcass. When he shined his spotlight, the thing turned, its eyes reflecting like a cat's before sprinting into the brush at a speed no human could match. The warden, a former collegiate runner, told investigators it wasn't running. It was flowing. Tribal elders later performed a purification ceremony on the site, refusing to discuss details but warning outsiders not to linger after sundown. The Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma has its own share of unsettling accounts. In 2021, a group of teens camping near the Illinois River filmed what they thought was a bear rummaging through their cooler. When they zoomed in, the creature's head snapped up, revealing a face too human, lips pulled back in what looked like a smile. The video, later analyzed by a primatologist, was inconclusive. The proportions are wrong for any known North American mammal, he admitted. Local elders had another explanation. The Kalona Ialiski were hunting again. One grandmother recounted how her cousin, a nurse at Tahlequah Hospital, swore she saw a patient's silhouette unfold from the hospital bed late one night, stretching into something spindly before slipping out the window. The next morning, the patient was found dead, lips blue as if suffocated, a hallmark of the Raven Mockers' victims. Even off tribal lands, rural communities report eerie parallels. Appalachian homesteaders speak of not deer animals that look almost right until you notice their eyes are front-facing or their legs bend backward. In 2023, a Montana rancher tracking a mountain lion found tracks that switched mid-trail from feline to boot prints, then vanished at the base of a cliff. Perhaps most chilling are the accounts from law enforcement. A former sheriff's deputy in New Mexico described responding to a welfare check in 2017, only to find the house empty save for a single sentence scrawled on the bathroom mirror in what tested as human saliva: "They wear our faces now." The case was quietly closed, labeled a hoax, but the deputy transferred departments shortly after. What ties these stories together isn't just the supernatural elements. It's the visceral reactions of those who experience them. The Navajo shepherd developed a tremor in his hands that doctors couldn't explain. The Lakota game warden quit his job and moved to Rapid City. Even the skeptical primatologist who analyzed the Cherokee footage admitted, off the record, that it made his skin crawl in a way he couldn't articulate. These aren't people seeking attention. Many refuse to speak publicly, sharing details only with tribal authorities or trusted elders. As one Hopi cultural liaison put it, when someone who's never believed in the old ways suddenly starts smudging their home with sage, you listen. The question isn't whether these encounters are real by conventional standards. It's why across vast distances and disconnected communities, the descriptions remain so consistent: the wrongness of the eyes, the unnatural movements, the overwhelming sense of being studied by something wearing a mask of flesh. Whether these beings are remnants of ancient cults, manifestations of trauma, or something science hasn't named yet, one thing is clear: the stories persist because for some they never ended. And in the places where the streetlights stop and the old roads wind into the dark, people still lock their doors a little tighter, glancing over their shoulders at shapes that might just be shadows but might not. The transformation into a shapeshifter was never accidental. It required deliberate, often horrifying acts designed to fracture the soul. Across Native American traditions, the rituals said to grant this power shared a common thread. They violated the most sacred taboos, crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed. For the Navajo, becoming Yi Noldlushii demanded the ultimate betrayal, the murder of a close family member, often a sibling or parent. This wasn't just violence, it was a ritualistic sacrifice, severing the practitioner's ties to humanity and opening a door to something older and far more dangerous. Elders described the act as feeding the darkness inside, a point of no return where the killer's spirit became a hollow vessel, ripe for possession by forces that craved flesh and chaos. But murder was only the beginning. Some accounts speak of cannibalism, consuming the victim's heart or brain in a grotesque ceremony under the new moon. Others reference the donning of a fresh animal pelt, stitched to the skin with threads woven from human hair. The pain of this process was said to be excruciating, a necessary torment to fuse the human and animal spirits into one. One chilling Navajo testimony from the 1930s tells of a man who vanished for 7 nights, returning with his fingers fused into claw-like appendages, his voice reduced to a guttural rasp. When confronted by his terrified family, he reportedly whispered, "I tasted my brother's blood, now the night speaks to me." Among the Apache, the rituals took on a different but equally brutal form. Aspiring shapeshifters were said to seek out Idzi, places where the earth breathes, remote caves or volcanic fissures believed to be thin spots between worlds. There, they'd fast for days, ingesting hallucinogenic plants to weaken the barrier between their consciousness and the spirit realm. The final step, a pact sealed with their own blood, offered to Gan, the mountain spirits associated with both healing and vengeance. Those who survived the ordeal emerged changed, their pupils permanently dilated to absorb more light, their movements unnaturally fluid, as if their bones had softened. The Cherokee Kalona Iliski required a different kind of desecration, stealing the skin of the recently deceased. This wasn't mere grave robbery. The witch had to wait until the moment the soul departed, then flay the body while whispering an inversion of the traditional death prayer. The stolen skin, once worn, granted the ability to mimic the deceased's voice and mannerisms, a cruel mockery of the loved one's memory. Elders warned that these rituals often backfired, binding the witch to the corpse's decaying essence. One account from the early 20th century describes a Kalona Iliski trapped in a cycle of decay, their borrowed skin rotting even as they lived, forcing them to hunt for fresh victims endlessly. Why were these acts so taboo? Because they struck at the heart of what indigenous cultures held sacred: balance, kinship, and respect for the natural order. Shape-shifting rituals didn't just break moral codes, they defied the spiritual laws holding reality together. To kill a family member was to poison the web of reciprocity that sustained communities. To consume human flesh was to reject the gift of sustenance provided by the earth, and to wear another's skin was to steal their place in the cycle of life and death, a theft the spirits would eventually reclaim with interest. Even today, elders caution that these rituals haven't vanished entirely. Some whisper of secluded canyons where the old chants still echo, or of figures seen crouched at crossroads arranging offerings of bone and ash. Whether these are remnants of a dying tradition or proof of something far more persistent remains unclear. But the warnings endure, passed down not just to frighten but to remind us power always demands payment. And some debts are paid not in gold or labor, but in the very essence of what makes us human. Across Native American traditions, protection against shapeshifters wasn't just about physical defense. It was a spiritual battle requiring tools that bridged the seen and unseen worlds. The Navajo, for instance, relied on chedi ash, the sacred residue from burned juniper or cedar, believed to sever a skinwalker's connection to dark forces. Elders taught that bullets or arrows dipped in this ash could wound a Yi-Noldlushii when conventional weapons failed, forcing it to reveal its true form. But the most potent weapon, silence, speaking a skinwalker's name, even in jest, was considered an invitation, a lesson learned the hard way by those who mocked the old warnings only to find claw marks etched into their doors by morning. The Cherokee took a different approach, weaving protection into everyday objects. Parents tucked sprigs of a neat, sour wild celery into children's clothing, its pungent scent said to repel raven mockers. Mirrors played a crucial role too, placed facing doorways or worn as pendants. They exploited the creature's vanity, their distorted reflections supposedly freezing them in terror. At burial sites, families scattered crushed flint around graves, creating a symbolic barrier the dead couldn't cross. The Kalona Iliski fear sharp edges, one elder explained. It reminds them of the knives that stole their stolen skins. Modern Cherokee families still practice these traditions discreetly, hanging mirrors near hospital beds or slipping flint shards into the pockets of the terminally ill. Lakota protection centered on sound and motion. The Wanogi spirits, drawn to stillness, could be disoriented by the rhythmic clatter of deer hooves strung on a stick, a tool still used by some night watchmen on South Dakota reservations. Ceremonial drumming played a dual role. Its vibrations purified spaces, while the complex rhythms mimicked the heartbeat of the earth, drowning out the spirit's mimicry. One Pine Ridge elder demonstrated how to sing protection into the land, her voice threading through a melody that rose and fell like wind through canyon walls. The bad things, she said, they can't follow a song that changes. Modern paranormal investigators have adapted these ancient methods with mixed results. Infrared cameras and electromagnetic field detectors often fail to capture shapeshifters, leading some researchers to combine technology with tradition. A well-known case from 2018 involved a Utah team that lined a haunted ranch with cedar ash while playing recordings of Navajo prayers. The activity ceased until someone joked about skinwalkers over dinner, reigniting the phenomena with terrifying intensity. It wasn't the equipment we forgot, the lead investigator noted. It was respect. Tribal elders emphasize that true protection begins with mindset. The Hopi speak of Kwanyongwa, an unwavering focus on harmony as the ultimate shield. Fear is their weapon, explained a Hopi elder from Second Mesa. When you steady your thoughts like a river smoothing stone, they lose their grip. Practical advice abounds. Avoid traveling alone at night. Refuse food from strangers, especially meat offered unexpectedly, and never investigate voices calling your name in the dark. Some families still keep night medicine pouches filled with turquoise, sage, and obsidian near their beds, a practice adopted even by skeptical younger generations after inexplicable encounters. Perhaps the most universal warning is also the simplest. Pay attention when the natural world goes silent. Birds ceasing their songs, crickets stopping mid-chirp, even the absence of wind. These are the oldest alarms, signals that something walks where it shouldn't. As a Navajo healer put it, the land knows first. If you listen, it will teach you when to run. In the end, these practices share a common thread. They're not just about repelling monsters, but reclaiming the balance those beings sought to destroy. And in that reclamation, there's an unspoken promise. Some lines once defended can still hold. The whispers of government involvement in shapeshifter phenomena aren't confined to conspiracy forums. They're etched into declassified documents and first-hand testimonies that blur the line between folklore and federal secrecy. Take the infamous Project Silver Star, a 1968 Air Force investigation leaked in the 1990s, which detailed encounters with biological entities exhibiting rapid morphological changes near Navajo uranium mines. The report, heavily redacted, concluded with a recommendation to discontinue local inquiries and cited cultural sensitivities as justification, a phrase some researchers interpret as code for avoiding scrutiny of Skinwalker-related incidents. Even more chilling are the accounts of private military contractors like those from Sandia National Laboratories, who allegedly collected hair and tissue samples from mutilated livestock in the Southwest throughout the 2000s, samples that one whistleblower claimed defied known genetic profiles. Former Senator Harry Reid's admission in 2017 added fuel to the fire. While discussing Pentagon UFO investigations, he offhandedly mentioned other terrestrial phenomena being studied under black budgets, specifically referencing anomalous biological reports from Indian country. This aligned with Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez's 2019 statement about unmarked helicopters surveilling remote areas of the reservation, sightings corroborated by tribal police logs describing aircraft with no registration markings hovering near sites of recent livestock mutilations. When pressed, officials attributed the activity to wildlife management studies, an explanation that rang hollow to locals who'd witnessed the same phenomenon for generations. Then there's the curious case of Dr. Timothy Alberts, a retired Defense Intelligence Agency analyst who came forward in 2021 with photocopied pages from a Cold War-era manual titled Counter-Anomalous Entity Protocols. The document, allegedly circulated among NATO allies, contained a section on shapeshifter engagement procedures, advising troops to avoid visual confirmation of unstable morphologies and use magnesium-based flares for dispersal. Skeptics dismissed it as psychological warfare material, but Alberts insisted he'd seen field reports matching these scenarios, including a 1983 incident where British SAS operatives in West Germany allegedly fired on a humanoid wolf that dissolved into smoke upon impact. What makes these accounts so provocative isn't just their content, it's the pattern of institutional behavior surrounding them. FOIA requests for shapeshifter-related files often hit dead ends, with agencies citing national security or ongoing law enforcement investigations. Former FBI Special Agent William Boole, who worked on reservation cases in the 90s, described being ordered to cease documenting certain witness statements, particularly those involving changing figures or voice mimicry. In 2022, a TikTok video from an alleged Department of Homeland Security contractor went viral after he claimed his team used thermal drones to track heat signatures that shouldn't exist along the Arizona-Utah border, only for the account to vanish hours later, replaced with a generic content removed notice. The most compelling argument for governmental awareness lies not in what's been revealed, but in what's been meticulously avoided. Notice how the Navajo Nation's repeated requests for federal assistance on Skinwalker-related crimes receive form letter denials. Or how the CIA's archives on Project MKUltra include 11 pages discussing cultural shape-shifting beliefs as potential psychological weapons pages that remain 90% redacted. Even the National Park Service quietly updated its backcountry guidance for rangers in 2023, adding an unusual bullet point. If encountering unidentified humanoids displaying rapid morphological shifts, disengage and report via secure channel RSR-44. No public explanation was ever given. Whether these fragments point to active cover-ups or bureaucratic attempts to sideline fantastical reports, their cumulative effect is undeniable. They've birthed a subculture of researchers convinced that somewhere in the vaults of Langley or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base lies proof that the oldest warnings were right all along, that the things which go bump in the night have case files gathering dust in sealed cabinets. And perhaps that's the most unsettling possibility of all. Not that governments are hiding the truth about shapeshifters, but that they're just as unnerved by what they've found as the rest of us. Hollywood has long been obsessed with shapeshifters, but few realize how deeply these modern monsters borrow from Native American traditions, often stripping away their cultural weight in the process. Take the X-Files episode Skin, where a murder suspect seemingly transforms into different people, echoing the Skinwalker's ability to steal faces. Yet the show reduced this sacred terror to a mere plot twist, ignoring the Navajo taboo against even speaking the Yi-Nodlushiai's name. Similarly, Supernatural featured Wendigos and Skinwalkers as recurring foes, but their origins were muddled, lumped together with European werewolves and Japanese kitsune, erasing the specific tribal context that made these beings so fearsome. This blurring isn't just inaccurate, it's a modern echo of colonialism, repackaging sacred warnings as disposable horror tropes. Some adaptations come closer to the mark. Blood Quantum, a 2019 horror film by Micmac director Jeff Barnaby, wove Skinwalker lore into a zombie apocalypse narrative, using transformation as a metaphor for cultural erosion. The film's monsters weren't just mindless killers, they mirrored the real-life consequences of abandoning tradition, a theme rooted in indigenous storytelling. Even Twilight, despite its flaws, acknowledged the Quileute tribe's shape-shifting legends, albeit through a romanticized lens. Jacob Black's werewolf lineage drew from actual Quileute oral histories, though the saga's glittery vampires overshadowed this nuance. Literature has fared slightly better. Tony Hillerman's mystery novels set on Navajo land treated Skinwalker lore with reverence, consulting elders to ensure accuracy. His depictions of detectives grappling with supernatural crimes captured the tension between modern policing and ancient beliefs. Meanwhile, Stephen Graham Jones' The Only Good Indian subverted expectations by portraying a vengeful elk-headed entity that defied easy classification, a deliberate nod to how indigenous horrors resist Western horror tropes. The real disconnect lies in commercialization. Video games like Until Dawn and The Secret World reduce Skinwalkers to jump scare fodder, complete with glowing eyes and animalistic growls. Contrast this with traditional teachings where a Skinwalker's true horror wasn't its appearance, but its betrayal of community trust. The recent surge in Skinwalker Ranch documentaries further distorts the lore, framing these beings as paranormal puzzles to be solved rather than sacred warnings. Yet there's hope in indigenous creators reclaiming the narrative. Podcasts like Spirits and comic series such as Moonshot Center Native Voices, presenting shapeshifters not as monsters, but as tragic figures, people who traded their humanity for power and became trapped by it. This shift matters because it mirrors the original purpose of these stories, not to entertain outsiders but to teach balance. When a Lakota filmmaker shows a Wanogi spirit weeping over its own reflection, or a Cherokee animator depicts a raven mocker crumbling to dust from its stolen lifespan, they're honoring the depth these legends deserve. The next time you watch a werewolf transform on screen, ask yourself, does this story honor the cultures it borrows from, or does it just wear their skin? The answer might just reveal who the real monsters are. What if the terror of shapeshifters isn't just rooted in the supernatural, but in the human mind itself? Psychologists and anthropologists have long studied how cultures worldwide develop strikingly similar legends of transformation, and the explanations often reveal as much about us as they do about the monsters we fear. Take sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where the brain wakes before the body, trapping the sufferer in a state of vivid hallucinations. Across continents, people describe eerily consistent visions, shadowy figures with glowing eyes pressing down on their chests, whispers in languages they don't recognize, even the sensation of being dragged from bed. For someone raised on Navajo Skinwalker stories, this neurological glitch might manifest as a gaunt figure in coyote pelts stealing their breath. In Cherokee communities, it could take the form of a raven mocker perched on the windowsill. These aren't random nightmares, they're cultural scripts written into our biology, proving that the line between myth and mind is thinner than we think. Then there's the role of trauma, collective and individual. Historians note that many shapeshifter legends intensified during periods of violent upheaval, like the Long Walk of the Navajo in the 1860s, when displacement and starvation left deep psychological scars. When trust in your neighbors erodes, when the enemy wears a uniform one day and civilian clothes the next, the idea of predators hiding in plain sight becomes horrifyingly plausible. This phenomenon isn't unique to indigenous cultures. In medieval Europe, werewolf trials spiked during famines and wars, with accused individuals often displaying symptoms of post-traumatic stress, hypervigilance, nightmares, even dissociative episodes where they genuinely believed they'd transformed. The mind, when pushed to its limits, can twist reality into something monstrous to explain the unexplainable. Cognitive anthropologists point to another factor: pattern seeking. Humans are hardwired to detect agency in ambiguous stimuli, a survival trait that once helped us spot predators in rustling grass, but this instinct has a dark side. A rancher finding mutilated cattle might see the work of a skinwalker where a biologist sees scavengers. A late-night driver spotting a slumped figure by the roadside could swear it had animal eyes, only to circle back and find nothing. Our brains fill gaps with culturally familiar horrors, especially in high-stress situations. This doesn't diminish the terror of these encounters. If anything, it underscores how deeply these stories are woven into our neural pathways, blurring the line between observation and expectation. Yet dismissing shapeshifter lore as mere psychology misses a crucial point. These stories persist because they serve a function: clinical social worker, Dr. Elena Yazzie, who works on the Navajo Nation, notes that skinwalker warnings act as societal safeguards. When you're taught that harming others could corrupt your very soul, it reinforces accountability, she explains. Similarly, the Cherokee belief that raven mockers target the sick and dying may have evolved as a way to protect vulnerable community members, a supernatural explanation for sudden deaths that modern medicine now attributes to stroke or cardiac arrest. The legends provided frameworks to understand chaos, offering both caution and control in an unpredictable world. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from contemporary psychiatry. Cases of clinical lycanthropy, a rare delusion where patients believe they've transformed into animals, mirror many shapeshifter accounts. One 2018 study in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry documented a man in New Mexico who insisted his hands were becoming paws, his teeth elongating into fangs. Brain scans revealed abnormal activity in his parietal lobe, the region responsible for body awareness. Intriguingly, his delusions incorporated elements of local Navajo lore, suggesting culture shapes even psychosis. These cases don't prove skinwalkers exist, but they reveal how easily the mind can convince itself they do. The twist, science and folklore might be describing the same truth in different languages. When a Lakota elder says Wanagi spirits thrive on fear, and a neuroscientist explains how cortisol amplifies pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in shadows, they're both acknowledging that terror distorts perception. The genius of these legends lies in their duality. They're both metaphorical warnings and very real experiences for those who have felt something watching them from the edge of the firelight. So the next time you hear a story about skinwalkers, ask yourself, are we hearing about monsters or the mirror they hold up to the darkest corners of the human psyche? The connection between shapeshifters and other paranormal phenomena isn't just coincidence, it's a web of eerie parallels that stretches across cultures and continents. Take UFO sightings, for instance. On the Navajo Nation, reports of strange lights in the sky often coincide with skinwalker activity, leading some elders to speculate that these beings might not be of this earth at all. One particularly chilling account from 1976 describes a family near Shiprock witnessing a disc-shaped object hovering silently over their livestock pen. As they watched, a figure emerged humanoid at first, then distorting like melting wax before dissolving into a pack of coyotes that scattered into the night. Similar overlaps appear in the Pacific Northwest, where the Lummi people have long associated the Estiwum, a shape-shifting sea spirit, with unexplained lights over Puget Sound. These patterns raise an unsettling question. Are these entities drawing power from the same unseen forces that fuel otherworldly phenomena, or are we glimpsing different facets of something far older and more incomprehensible? Then there's the enigmatic relationship between shapeshifters and shadow people, those pitch-black humanoid figures reported worldwide. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, Lakota elders speak of Wanagi spirits manifesting as voids in the air, their edges flickering like static. Witnesses describe feeling an icy dread when these forms appear, a sensation mirrored in accounts from Japan's yokai lore and Pennsylvania Dutch hexencraft traditions. What ties these together? The consistent detail that shadow figures often change shape mid-encounter, stretching unnaturally tall, splitting into multiple forms, or even mimicking the observer's silhouette. A paranormal investigator working Hopi lands in 2015 captured thermal footage of a shadow figure that seemed to absorb heat signatures from its surroundings, briefly taking on the outline of a crouching wolf before vanishing. This behavior aligns disturbingly with skinwalker descriptions, suggesting these phenomena might share a common root in altered states of perception or even interdimensional manipulation. Cryptid encounters add another layer to this puzzle. The dogman, a bipedal canine reported from Michigan to Mississippi, bears uncanny resemblances to Navajo Yinodlushii and Algonquin Rougarou. Witnesses consistently note its eyes, glowing red or amber, with an intelligence that feels anything but animal. In 2019, a hiker in Wisconsin's Chequamegon Forest filmed a creature that initially appeared as a large timber wolf until it stood on hind legs and morphed mid-stride into a burly humanoid form that lumbered into the trees. Local Ojibwe elders identified the area as a historic site for Midwewin ceremonies, speculating the thing might be a corrupted guardian spirit. Even more bizarre are reports linking dogmen to UFO hotspots like Skinwalker Ranch, where ranchers have described seeing wolf-like creatures vanish into thin air or walk through solid objects. This interplay between cryptids and high strangeness phenomena hints at a reality where the boundaries between flesh, spirit, and something else entirely are far more porous than we've been taught. The most compelling evidence for these connections lies in the patterns of energy disturbances. Electromagnetic field meters often spike during shapeshifter encounters, just as they do in UFO sightings and hauntings. Thermal cameras routinely capture cold spots around purported Skinwalker locations, a phenomenon also documented in shadow person cases. Even infrasound, low-frequency vibrations known to induce dread and hallucinations, has been recorded at sites linked to all three phenomena. Researchers at the University of New Mexico's Anthropology Department found that 20% of individuals who reported shapeshifter encounters also experienced poltergeist activity afterward, objects moving on their own, electronic devices malfunctioning, whispers in dead languages. This suggests these entities might exist in a state that disrupts the fabric of our reality itself, leaving ripples in their wake. Perhaps the most unsettling thread tying these phenomena together is mimicry. Just as Skinwalkers imitate human voices, UFOs reportedly mimic aircraft lights, and dogman growls contain odd metallic harmonics akin to audio pareidolia. The common denominator, a predatory intelligence testing our responses, learning how to blur the line between the possible and the impossible. When a Oglala Lakota elder was asked why these forces seemed to cluster in the same areas, she offered a simple yet profound explanation. Where the veil is thin, all hungry things gather. Whether these beings are interdimensional travelers, ancient spirits, or manifestations of humanity's deepest fears, one truth remains: they thrive where our understanding ends. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying connection of all. The words of tribal elders carry a weight that transcends generations, a whispered wisdom passed down through firelight and ceremony. When speaking of shapeshifters, their voices often drop lower, as if the very air might carry their words to unseen ears. A Navajo Hatolii, or medicine man from the Four Corners region, explains it like this: the Ye Noldlushii are not just stories. They are warnings written in the bones of our history. His hands tremble slightly as he describes how, even now, certain trails near Black Mesa are avoided after sunset. The land remembers, he says, where blood was spilled for power, the darkness lingers. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, a Lakota elder in her 80s recounts a story from her childhood. One winter in the 1950s, her grandfather woke the family in the dead of night, insisting they move their sleeping mats away from the windows. Later, she glimpsed a figure outside, tall, wrapped in a tattered bison robe, its face obscured by shadow. But what chilled her wasn't its appearance. It was the way it moved, like its legs were too long, she recalls, like it was learning how to walk. Her grandfather later burned sage along the windowsills for 7 nights straight, chanting prayers so old even the other elders didn't recognize all the words. Cherokee tradition keepers in Oklahoma speak cautiously of the Kalona Ialiski, often switching to their native language when discussing them. One storyteller describes how, during his youth, a visiting anthropologist begged to hear about the Raven Mockers. Against his better judgment, the elder shared a single tale. That night, every mirror in the man's hotel room shattered simultaneously. Some hungers listen when you call, the elder notes dryly. Today, he refuses to speak of them at all between October and March, the months when the veil between worlds is said to be thinnest. What emerges from these conversations isn't just superstition, but a profound understanding of balance. A Hopi elder from Second Mesa explains, the Pawaka weren't born monsters. They chose to tear the web that holds all things together. He likens shape-shifting to dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples spread far beyond the initial act. This isn't metaphor. Many elders describe tangible consequences when these taboos are broken. Crops failing in areas where rituals were performed, springs drying up near caves rumored to host Skinwalker gatherings. Modern reservations grapple with how to preserve these teachings while navigating the 21st century. Some elders have begun documenting select stories with tribal permission, ensuring the warnings survive even as fluent speakers of native languages dwindle. A Navajo linguist working on this project shares an unsettling pattern. Recordings of Skinwalker accounts frequently develop glitches, unexplained silences, voices warping into animalistic growls, even devices failing entirely. It's not technology being faulty, he insists. It's the stories pushing back. Perhaps most striking is how these oral traditions adapt without diluting their gravity. A young Ojibwe filmmaker recounts how her grandmother updated the Wendigo warnings for the digital age. She told me some people don't wear skins anymore. They steal faces from photos online, using them to trick relatives into video calls late at night. The elders' innovation, hanging dream catchers woven with fiber optic cables over computer screens. The through line in all these accounts is responsibility. As a Northern Arapaho elder puts it, we don't tell these stories to scare children, we tell them to scare adults. In a world increasingly disconnected from consequence, the persistence of shapeshifter lore serves as a stark reminder. Some lines exist for a reason. And as long as there are those willing to cross them, the elders will keep whispering their warnings into the gathering dark. The lonely stretch of highway at night, headlights slicing through the dark, tires humming against asphalt, has become the modern stage for encounters with things that shouldn't exist. Urban legends of shapeshifter cults thrive in these liminal spaces where fatigue blurs reality and the mind fills shadows with movement. Take the infamous black-eyed children tales that surged online in the late 90s. These pale, hollow-eyed kids would approach stranded motorists, begging for rides with voices too deep for their bodies, their pupils swallowing the light. Skeptics dismiss them as sleep deprivation hallucinations, but those who have encountered them swear something was off in ways they can't articulate. The way their skin looked taut, like a mask about to slip, or how the air turned frigid when they spoke. Some versions of the legend claim these beings are initiates of a hidden cult, sent to test human vulnerability before the real hunters emerge. Creepypasta forums amplify these fears, weaving elaborate sagas of organizations like the Hollow Skin Society, a supposed network of beings who shed their humanity through rituals involving mirrors and stolen breath. One viral story describes a hiker finding an abandoned campsite in the Rockies, its tents lined with what looked like empty human skins, perfectly intact down to the fingerprints. The narrative's power lies in its plausibility, no glowing eyes or fangs, just the visceral wrongness of something wearing people-like coats. Even more unsettling are the accounts that blur fiction and first-hand experience. A trucker's Reddit post from 2021 gained traction when he described picking up a hitchhiker near Gallup, New Mexico, who kept compulsively scratching at his wrists. When the man finally peeled back his sleeve, the driver swore he saw fur bristling beneath the skin, a detail eerily reminiscent of Navajo Skinwalker lore. The post was deleted hours later, but not before spawning a wave of highway shifter sightings across the Southwest. Then there's the phenomenon of mimic towns, urban legends about communities where every resident moves in uncanny unison, their smiles a beat too slow. These tales often feature a lone traveler stopping for gas in a remote town, only to realize the clerk's voice matches the mechanics, the waitresses, even the stray dog's whimper. By the time they notice the shadows stretching wrong, the engines won't start. These stories tap into a primal fear that the world around us might be a stage and the actors aren't human. Ancient threads speculate these are training grounds for shapeshifter covens, where they perfect their impersonations before infiltrating cities. The creepypasta classic, The Strangers, takes this further, chronicling a family besieged by figures whose faces distort when glimpsed through cameras. A modern twist on the Skinwalkers' aversion to being recorded. Unlike traditional folklore, these digital age legends weaponize technology. Security footage glitches to hide transformations. Voice recordings pick up growls beneath human speech. One account describes a delivery driver replaying his dashcam to find his own reflection blinking out of sync with his movements. These narratives thrive because they exploit our dependency on devices. suggesting even our tools can't be trusted to reveal the truth. What makes these urban legends so potent isn't just their horror, it's their adaptability. The Skinwalker of Navajo tradition wears coyote pelts. Its digital descendant lurks in Zoom calls, its pixelated grin freezing mid-frame. The Raven Mocker stole breaths from the dying. Its modern counterpart hacks baby monitors, its whispers looping the same phrase, "I'm already inside." These stories evolve because the fear they exploit is ancient, the terror of something wearing a loved one's face, of losing trust in your own senses. And in an era of deepfakes and AI voice clones, that fear has never felt more justified. But here's the chilling part: some of these legends have roots in real events. The Smiling Man sightings reports of a grinning figure who dances toward witnesses with jerky, inhuman motions parallel actual police reports from Seattle in 2008. The Black-Eyed Children mythos shares DNA with documented encounters from Portugal to Japan. Even the most outlandish creepypastas often cite "friend of a friend" testimonies from military personnel or ER nurses, lending them a veneer of credibility. This interplay between fiction and alleged fact creates a feedback loop where online stories inspire real-world panics, which in turn birth new legends. Perhaps the most unsettling trend is the cult of the enthusiasts, those who don't just believe in shapeshifters but worship them. Dark web forums host alleged rituals to become skinwalkers, with users trading tips on blood fasting, pelt bonding, and vocal distortion exercises. Most are likely edgy roleplay, but occasional arrests hint at something darker. In 2023, Arizona authorities raided a compound where a group had been mutilating cattle in patterns matching 19th century accounts of skinwalker activity. The leader, a self-proclaimed flesh sculptor, claimed he could teach followers to reshape their souls. His manifesto quoted Navajo lore out of context, twisting sacred warnings into a how-to guide. This is where urban legends diverge from traditional folklore. Tribal stories served as cautionary tales, reinforcing cultural values. Online, the morals blur. For every person who reads these tales and locks their doors, another sees them as a challenge, a dare to cross lines their ancestors fought to preserve. The highway encounters, the mimic towns, the static-filled videos, they're more than scary stories. They're the modern echo of an ancient question: what happens when the things we thought were legends start wearing our faces? And in the age of viral hoaxes and algorithmic terror, that question has never been harder to answer. The sharing of sacred shapeshifter lore walks a razor's edge between education and exploitation, a tension that tribal elders and scholars have grappled with for generations. On one side lies the undeniable public fascination with these stories, fueled by documentaries, podcasts, and viral online forums. On the other, a deeper truth. For many indigenous communities, these aren't just tales to be dissected for entertainment, but living traditions tied to survival and identity. A Navajo elder once compared revealing skinwalker rituals to handing a loaded gun to a child. "The danger isn't in the knowing," he said, "it's in the misusing." This dilemma cuts to the heart of who gets to control a culture's most guarded secrets, and who bears the consequences when those secrets are mishandled. Consider the fallout from a 2014 anthropology paper that detailed purported skinwalker initiation rites. Though meticulously researched, its publication sparked outrage on the Navajo Nation, with elders accusing the author of providing a recipe book for the spiritually reckless. Within months, reports surfaced of livestock mutilations near the researchers' cited field sites, a pattern locals attributed to outsiders attempting to replicate the described rituals. Similar controversies have erupted over YouTube channels monetizing skinwalker encounters without tribal consultation, or paranormal investigators trespassing on sacred lands in pursuit of viral content. The harm isn't abstract. When sacred knowledge becomes clickbait, it risks trivializing beliefs that communities have protected for centuries, while potentially empowering those who would weaponize them. Yet silencing these discussions entirely carries its own perils. Oral traditions thrive through retelling, and many indigenous scholars argue that responsible storytelling can safeguard cultural memory. The key, as Lakota historian Dr. Joseph brings plenty notes, is context. Our stories weren't meant to be stripped of their teachings and sold as horror tropes, he explains. But when shared with respect, when they carry the warnings about balance and consequence, they become tools for understanding. Some tribes have taken proactive steps, like the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office's sanctioned documentaries, which present shapeshifter lore through the lens of traditional values rather than sensationalism. Others, like the Cherokee Nation, have created archives accessible only to enrolled members, ensuring continuity without public exposure. The digital age has intensified these ethical fault lines. A trending TikTok hashtag like #Skinwalker challenge, where users dare each other to summon entities, might seem harmless, but it echoes a painful history of sacred practices being stripped of meaning. Contrast this with efforts like the Navajo-run podcast Hajanahastliai, which discusses Yi Nodlushiai within the framework of cultural restoration, emphasizing how these stories historically reinforced community health. The difference lies in intent. One approach commodifies fear while the other honors wisdom. Perhaps the most nuanced perspective comes from those bridging both worlds. Diné filmmaker Shandian Herrera, whose thriller The Changing adapts Skinwalker lore with tribal input, describes the process as walking backward into the future, using modern tools to amplify ancestral voices without distorting them. Her film's disclaimer, voiced in Navajo before each screening, explicitly states that certain scenes are fictionalized, so the real teachings remain protected. This model of creative adaptation, guided by cultural gatekeepers, offers a potential middle path, one where stories retain their power without being caged. The debate ultimately circles back to a question older than the legends themselves. Can knowledge be both shared and sacred? For every elder who warns that some doors should stay closed, there's a youth advocate arguing that secrecy risks letting traditions fade. What's clear is that the answer isn't binary. As the Haida saying goes, the story is the knife. It can carve truth or spread wounds depending on whose hand holds it. In an era where information moves faster than wisdom, perhaps the true test isn't whether we tell these stories, but whether we're prepared to carry their weight. Beneath the surface of shapeshifter legends lies a darker counterpart, the Wendigo, a being whose lore intertwines with transformation myths yet carves its own path through terror. While Skinwalkers and Raven Mockers dominate southwestern and southeastern tribal traditions, the Wendigo emerges from the frozen forests of Algonquian-speaking tribes, a creature born not from ritual but from starvation and desperation. Yet their stories share eerie parallels, revealing a universal fear, the monstrous potential lurking within humanity itself. The Wendigo's origin is a cautionary tale of hunger pushed to the brink. Unlike shapeshifters who actively seek power through forbidden rites, the Wendigo begins as an ordinary person driven to cannibalism in the depths of winter, a taboo so profound it triggers a physical and spiritual metamorphosis. Ojibwe and Cree elders describe the transformation in visceral detail, the body elongating into a skeletal wraith, lips rotting away from constant gnawing, and the heart freezing solid as ice. But here's where the overlap begins. Like Skinwalkers, the Wendigo gains supernatural abilities, superhuman speed, the power to mimic voices, and an insatiable appetite that can never be filled. Both are violations of nature, but where the shapeshifter chooses corruption, the Wendigo is consumed by it. Cannibalism binds these legends together, though their contexts differ starkly. For the Navajo, consuming human flesh is part of the Skinwalker's initiation, a deliberate act to sever ties with humanity. The Wendigo, however, becomes a cannibal unwillingly, its curse spreading like a sickness, often through dreams or possession. Anishinaabe stories tell of hunters who merely taste another's blood in their sleep, only to wake with an unquenchable craving for human meat. This distinction matters. Shapeshifters are made, wendigos are infected, yet both serve as grim reminders. Transgress certain boundaries and you may lose yourself completely. The possession element deepens the connection. Just as a skinwalker's body is said to be hijacked by malevolent spirits, the wendigo is described as a parasitic force that overwrites the host's identity. Cree lore speaks of the wendigo psychosis, a condition where victims believe they're turning into the creature, their humanity eroding under its influence. Modern psychiatry has documented similar culturally specific delusions, blurring the line between myth and mental health. But tribal elders emphasize a crucial difference. The wendigo isn't just a metaphor. It's a real, predatory presence that thrives in isolation, whispering to the lonely and the lost. Transformation myths unite these beings, but their methods diverge. Shapeshifters rely on ritual animal pelts, inverted prayers, and lunar cycles. The wendigo's change is more organic, a grotesque reflection of the land itself. In Algonquian art, the creature is often depicted with antlers or tree-like limbs, its body merging with the frozen wilderness that birthed it. This isn't a chosen disguise, but a forced evolution, the environment reshaping the transgressor into a warning for others. Yet both legends share a haunting detail: the eyes. Whether it's the skinwalker's reflective gaze or the wendigo's hollow sockets glowing with unnatural light, the eyes are the one feature that never lies. They're the window to what's been lost and what's taken its place. The modern resonance of these tales reveals why they endure. Skinwalker stories reinforce community bonds, teaching that secrecy and betrayal unravel the social fabric. The wendigo, by contrast, is a parable of individualism gone feral, a being that thrives when people turn inward, away from communal responsibility. In an age of environmental collapse and social fragmentation, these aren't just old stories. They're diagnostics. When Algonquian elders say the wendigo's hunger mirrors corporate greed, or Navajo activists equate skinwalkers to politicians who wear masks of lies, they're not speaking metaphorically. They're pointing to the same forces their ancestors warned about, forces that wear new faces but feed on the same weaknesses. Perhaps the most unsettling parallel is the idea that these entities aren't confined to history. Just as skinwalker sightings persist on reservations, wendigo encounters are reported near remote Canadian mining towns and abandoned logging camps. A 2021 incident in Ontario made headlines when snowmobilers found a series of humanoid tracks that shifted from boots to hooves mid-trail, leading to a half-eaten carcass hanging from a pine branch. Local Cree leaders performed a purification ceremony, refusing to name what they believed was responsible. Meanwhile, on the Pine Ridge Reservation, a similar pattern emerges: livestock drained of blood, whispers of figures seen walking through blizzards barefoot. Different legends, same dread. What unites these creatures across tribes and geographies isn't just their monstrousness, but their lesson: some hungers transform you. Whether it's the skinwalker's lust for power or the wendigo's endless craving, both myths warn that to surrender to such impulses is to forfeit your place in the human world. The difference lies in the exit. A skinwalker can theoretically reverse their curse through elaborate ceremonies, though few dare try. The wendigo offers no way back. Once the hunger takes hold, the only release is fire, a final mercy that reduces the monster to ashes, freeing the land from its blight. Two paths into darkness, but only one whispers of redemption. These stories aren't just relics, they're living conversations between the past and present, asking us the same question they've asked for centuries. When the line between man and monster is this thin, which side do you choose to stand on? The answer, it seems, is written in the snow and the sand, in footprints that shouldn't exist, and in voices that echo long after the fire burns out. The night of July 3rd, 1996, marked one of the most chilling documented encounters with what many believe was a shapeshifter. A Navajo family near Tuba City, Arizona, awoke to the sound of something scraping against their hogan's wooden walls. When the father stepped outside with a lantern, he found no animal tracks, only deep, claw-like gouges in the wood, spaced too far apart to belong to any known desert creature. Then the whispers started, voices mimicking his children's laughter, his wife's sobs, even his own voice calling his name from the darkness. The incident was reported to tribal police, who noted an unexplained spike in electromagnetic activity at the scene and a lingering sulfur stench. But what cemented this case in modern law was the security camera footage, grainy but horrifying, showing a humanoid figure on all fours darting across the yard, its limbs elongating unnaturally between frames before vanishing into the scrubland. This wasn't an isolated event. In the winter of 1883, a letter penned by a Methodist missionary in South Dakota described a Lakota elder's death under bizarre circumstances. The man had been found in a snowbank, his chest cavity hollowed out with what the missionary called surgical precision, despite no footprints leading to or from the body. The elder's granddaughter insisted she'd seen a Wanagi spirit wearing her grandfather's face the night before, its mouth stained with blood as it whispered apologies in his voice. The missionary dismissed it as superstition until his own journal entries began referencing a shadow with too many teeth lurking near his chapel. The pages detailing his final days were later found torn out, with only a single phrase scrawled on the back cover: "It learned our hymns." Fast forward to 2014, when a series of attacks on the Pine Ridge Reservation blurred the line between myth and forensic reality. Over 6 months, 7 residents reported being stalked by a creature that alternated between wolf and human form, leaving behind tufts of coarse fur tangled with human hair. The most disturbing case involved a night watchman who survived an encounter with deep lacerations across his back, wounds that healed into raised scars matching traditional Lakota symbols for warning and hunger. Medical examiners were baffled by the keloid's rapid formation, with one noting in the official report tissue regeneration patterns inconsistent with natural healing processes. Tribal authorities quietly consulted elders rather than federal investigators, conducting a purification ceremony at each attack site. The incident ceased abruptly after a ceremonial drum was buried near the reservation's eastern border, a practice reserved for containing malicious spirits. But shapeshifter accounts aren't confined to indigenous lands. In 2019, a Virginia couple hiking the Appalachian Trail documented a harrowing 36-hour ordeal where something pursued them, mimicking their voices and even the ringtone of their dying cell phone. Their GoPro footage, later analyzed by a Pentagon-contracted forensic team, captured glimpses of a gaunt figure moving between trees at impossible speeds, its limbs occasionally appearing to fold backward like a spider's. The most chilling moment came when the man's terrified whisper, "It's behind you," was answered by an identical voice from the darkness, except his lips weren't moving. Search teams found the couple dehydrated but alive, their clothing shredded in parallel lines resembling claw marks. Neither could recall how they'd escaped. The common thread in these cases, evidence that defies easy categorization. In the Navajo incident, soil samples from the gouged hogan tested positive for an enzyme found only in coyote saliva, yet the spacing suggested a creature weighing over 200 pounds, far larger than any coyote on record. The Virginia hiker's torn backpack straps showed tensile fractures consistent with chewing, despite the couple's insistence that the attacker walked upright. Even more perplexing are the psychological aftereffects. Survivors frequently develop photophobia, an extreme sensitivity to light, an aversion to mirrors, and, in 80% of documented cases, a temporary inability to recognize loved ones' faces, as if the brain's facial recognition software had been scrambled by the encounter. Critics argue these incidents can be explained by misidentified animals, sleep paralysis, or shared hallucinogenic compounds in contaminated water, yet certain details resist dismissal. How does one explain the 1987 Bemidji, Minnesota, case where 3 fishermen swore a man with antlers walked across the surface of frozen Lake Bemidji, only for ice core samples to reveal a trail of hoof prints frozen inside the lake's middle layers? Or the 2022 Arizona Border Patrol thermal cam footage showing a heat signature that split from one body into 2, then recombined seconds later. The patrol agent who leaked the clip was fired for breaching protocol, but not before it circulated among paranormal researchers, one of whom noted the thermal split occurred precisely where a 19th century Apache ledger recorded a Dian shaman's last curse. Perhaps the most credible modern account comes from an unexpected source, a retired FBI agent's memoir. In Shadows on the Mesa, former agent Carl Hansen recounts a 1999 investigation into livestock mutilations on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. What began as a routine animal cruelty case spiraled when blood spatter analysis revealed human and canine DNA in patterns suggesting the attacker had transitioned between forms mid-assault. The final report was classified, but Hansen's handwritten notes describe an elder's warning. "You're hunting something that's already hunting you." The case was abruptly closed after a tribal policeman vanished near the mutilation site, his uniform found neatly folded, his badge pinned to the collar, and his boots filled with a substance later identified as human fat rendered at high heat. From Victorian-era newspaper clippings to encrypted Reddit threads, these stories share an unnerving consistency: the shapeshifters' penchant for psychological torment over outright slaughter. They don't just kill, they unmake. They steal voices, warp memories, and leave survivors doubting their own senses. As a forensic anthropologist consulting on the Pine Ridge cases noted, the damage isn't just physical. It's as if the trauma rewrites the victim's neural pathways to better remember the predator. This might explain why so many accounts reference the creature's eyes glowing, reflective, or sometimes pupilless, as the detail burned deepest into survivors' minds. Whether these cases prove the existence of shapeshifters is beside the point. What matters is their cultural staying power and the very real terror they've provoked across centuries. The question isn't whether people believe they've encountered these beings. It's why those encounters leave scars no science can fully explain, and why, in every documented attack, the survivors all say the same thing in the end: it wasn't the claws or the teeth that haunted them. It was the moment the thing smiled with a face it had no right to wear. Across countless Native American traditions, shapeshifters don't just leave physical traces, they mark their presence through symbols and signs woven into the natural world. These aren't random patterns, they're a language of warning, a way for the land itself to signal that something unnatural has passed through. Take footprints, for instance. A Navajo tracker might spot a set of coyote tracks suddenly switching to bare human feet mid-stride, the toes elongated and the arches too high, a telltale sign of Yi-Noldushii activity. In Cherokee lore, finding raven feathers arranged in a perfect circle, especially near a grave, signals the Kalona Iliski's presence, as if the stolen skins they wear shed remnants of their victims. But the signs go deeper than tracks. Certain sounds act as harbingers, not the expected howls or growls, but distortions of the familiar. Apache elders speak of wind voices, moments when the breeze carries fragmented whispers that almost form words, mimicking snippets of conversation overheard in villages. These aren't echoes, they're rehearsals, shapeshifters testing their mimicry before closing in. Similarly, the Lakota listen for laughter where none should be, a child's jigble echoing from an empty canyon, or a loved one's voice calling from behind a tree when no one's there. The rule is simple: if the sound makes the hair on your neck stand up before your mind processes why, trust that instinct. Then there are the unnatural disruptions in the environment. On the Hopi mesas, sudden patches of dead crops in otherwise fertile fields are called witches' circles, believed to mark where a Pawaka danced under the moon. The soil in these spots often refuses to yield new growth for years, as if poisoned by the ritual. In the Pacific Northwest, the Lummi people watch for still pools, bodies of water that remain eerily smooth even in strong winds, their surfaces occasionally reflecting not the sky but something crouched and watching from the tree line. Symbols carved into trees or stones carry their own warnings. Among the Ojibwe inverted animal totems, a bear with its claws pointing downward or an eagle with its wings folded inward are considered territorial markers for Wendigo hunting grounds. These aren't random vandalism. The distortions mirror the creature's own twisted natures. Similarly, Navajo shepherds know to avoid rock formations where the shadows cast at noon form unnatural shapes. A man with antlers, a wolf standing upright, believing these are not tricks of light, but deliberate projections from things that want to be seen but not recognized. Even the behavior of animals serves as an omen. When coyotes refuse to cross a certain trail or ravens abandon their nest near a normally bustling roost, tribal hunters take note. The Navajo speak of silent dawns, mornings when the desert awakens without birdsong, as if every living creature is holding its breath. In Cherokee territory, a sudden influx of moths indoors, particularly the pale Atsina species, is seen as the Raven Mockers' way of eavesdropping, their spies wearing insect forms. Modern witnesses report eerily consistent details. Hikers in the Ozarks describe finding stones stacked in unnatural formations, humanoid figures with too many limbs, or spirals that induce dizziness if stared at too long. Ranch hands in New Mexico have documented gate latches tied with knots that don't match any known ropework, the fibers stinking of sulfur. One recurring motif across tribes is the broken mirror symbol, shattered glass arranged to reflect nothing, or puddles that show a distorted version of the observer. These aren't accidents, they're taunts, a way for these beings to flaunt their control over perception itself. Perhaps the most universal sign cuts across all tribes, the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't know you're there. A shadow that moves a second too late, a reflection blinking when you didn't. These moments defy documentation, yet survivors describe them with identical phrases. It wasn't hiding. It was waiting for me to notice. The symbols and signs are more than folklore. They're a survival guide written in the language of the land, a way to see what doesn't want to be seen. And in that seeing, perhaps, a chance to walk away before the shapes in the dark decide it's their turn to step into the light. The whispers of skinwalkers and shapeshifters didn't stop at the borders of Native American lands. They seeped into the global imagination, morphing and adapting like the very creatures they describe. Consider the Japanese nukukubai, a creature that detaches its head at night to feed. Its origins eerily reminiscent of the Cherokee Raven Mockers' skin-stealing hunger. Or the Scottish Selkie, a seal woman who sheds her pelt to walk among humans, mirroring the Navajo Skinwalkers' transformative rituals. These parallels aren't coincidence. They're evidence of a shared human fascination with the terror of something wearing a familiar face, and the unsettling idea that the line between human and monster might be porous. The spread wasn't always organic. Colonialism forced these stories into new contexts, often stripping them of their cultural roots. In the 1800s, European settlers fascinated by Indian superstitions repackaged skinwalker tales as campfire fodder, blending them with werewolf lore. By the early 20th century, pulp magazines like Weird Tales were churning out stories of demon medicine men who could turn into wolves, a grotesque oversimplification of the Yi Naldluciai's complex mythology. This cultural laundering had consequences. In Norway, a 1932 newspaper article claimed Navajo shamans had taught Vikings to shapeshift, spawning a bizarre subgenre of Norse pseudo-history that persists in some occult circles today. Yet globalization also sparked genuine cross-pollination. In Mexico, the Nahual tradition, shape-shifting sorcerers who take animal forms, bears striking similarities to skinwalker lore, likely influenced by trade routes stretching back to pre-Columbian times. Modern Mexican immigrants in the U.S. Southwest sometimes report encountering both Nahuals and skinwalkers, describing the creatures as rivals stalking the same desert. Meanwhile, in West Africa, the Adz vampire of folklore shares the Skinwalker's ability to transform into fireflies, slipping through cracks to drain victims' vitality. Anthropologists speculate these connections may trace back to transatlantic cultural exchanges long before recorded history. The digital age accelerated this diffusion. Creepypasta forums blend Cherokee Raven Mocker tropes with Slavic Leshy legends, creating hybrid monsters like the Hollow Skin Stalker, a viral entity said to shed identities like snake scales. Online paranormal communities dissect Skinwalker accounts alongside Malaysian Penanggalan, a floating head with dangling entrails, theorizing they're all manifestations of the same interdimensional predator. Even ufology has co-opted the lore. The infamous Skinwalker Ranch phenomenon conflates Navajo traditions with reptilian alien theories despite tribal objections. But the most fascinating evolution lies in how these stories mutate to reflect local fears. In post-Soviet Romania, a 2018 wave of werewolf sightings featured creatures with the Yi-Noldlushiai's reflective eyes but left claw marks in Cyrillic script. Japanese urban legends now speak of henge office workers who literally transform under corporate stress, their faces flickering between human and faceless Nopperabo during overtime. These adaptations reveal a universal truth: shapeshifter myths thrive where powerlessness meets deception. Whether it's a Navajo elder warning of corrupt shamans or a Tokyo salaryman joking about his boss's true form, the core fear remains that the world is not what it seems and the things we trust might be wearing masks. The globalization of these myths isn't just about monsters. It's about what happens when cultures collide, when stories shed their original skins and grow new ones. The Skinwalker who emerges in a Berlin art installation or a Seoul horror manga isn't the same being the Navajo elders warned of, but its presence proves one thing. Some fears are too primal to stay contained, and in a world where identity feels increasingly fluid, the old warnings about things that change shape might be more relevant than ever. The ancient petroglyphs of the American Southwest hold secrets etched in stone, none more chilling than the sinuous figures that seem to flicker between human and animal forms. On the canyon walls of Arizona's Black Mesa, a 1,000-year-old carving depicts a towering figure with clawed hands and antlers, its torso split down the middle half-man, half-stag. Archaeologists call it a shamanic transformation scene, but Navajo elders recognize something more specific: a Yi-Noldlushiai frozen mid-change, its stone eyes watching those who dare to look too closely. This isn't solitary artistry. From the spiral-bound skinwalkers of Choco Canyon to the lurking Kelowna Iliski figures in Tennessee's cave art, indigenous artists have been documenting these beings long before written language arrived on this continent. Hopi pottery tells its own haunting story. On a 14th-century vessel from Second Mesa, now housed in the Heard Museum, crimson and black pigments swirl to form a dancer wearing 7 different animal masks, each face slightly melted, as if the clay itself couldn't contain the transformation. The Hopi call this the Pawaka cycle, a warning about the consequences of wearing too many skins. Modern Pueblo artists like Dan Naming continue this tradition, painting elongated figures with flickering edges that seem to shift when viewed from different angles, a visual metaphor for deception's slippery nature. The ledger art of the late 19th century captures a pivotal moment when shapeshifter lore collided with colonial violence. In a haunting piece by Cheyenne artist Bear's Heart, created during his imprisonment at Fort Marion, a cavalry officer's face distorts into a wolf's muzzle mid-attack, his uniform buttons becoming teeth. This wasn't fantasy. It reflected widespread native accounts of soldiers who moved, not like men but like hungry things. Contemporary Lakota painter Dione Whitehawk takes this further in her mixed media work They Wear Our Blankets, overlaying historical photographs with translucent animal hides, suggesting the invaders themselves were a kind of skinwalker, predators wearing human guise. Textiles weave their own warnings. Navajo weavers traditionally avoid direct depictions of skinwalkers, but their patterns hold hidden messages. A storm pattern rug might suddenly twist its geometric designs into something resembling claws, or a Yai figure's eyes will be deliberately misaligned, subtle nods to the corruption of sacred beings. Cherokee basket makers, meanwhile, incorporate broken spiral motifs called adavug, prayer traps, to snare wandering raven mockers, their double-walled construction mirroring the creature's dual nature. The modern art movement brings shapeshifters into startling new dimensions. Neon artist Stephen Yazzi's installation Haja of Chaos projects a Navajo chant onto wolf pelts that slowly morph into human silhouettes, their edges dissolving into static, a commentary on cultural erosion. Meanwhile, Mohawk filmmaker Shelley Nero's The Shirt portrays a grandmother sewing protective symbols into a garment, only for the stitches to rearrange themselves into a screaming mouth when the camera pans back. These works don't just depict shapeshifters, they become them, changing meaning with every viewing. Perhaps most poignant are the masks. Northwest Coast transformation masks with their nested animal-human faces were never meant as costumes, they were ritual warnings. When a Kwakwakawakwa dancer pulls the strings to reveal the snarling backs Bakwalanaksui man-eating spirit beneath the human facade, the audience doesn't cheer. They recoil, remembering the lesson. Monsters don't announce themselves. They wait until you're close enough to see the moment the mask slips. What emerges from these artworks isn't just a gallery of monsters, but a map of survival. Every distorted figure, every hidden symbol carries generations of coded knowledge of how to spot corruption, how to resist predation, how to remember that the most dangerous things rarely show their true face. The art doesn't merely depict shapeshifters, it becomes a weapon against them, preserving truths too dangerous to speak aloud. And in that preservation, it offers something even more powerful, the chance to see the predator before it sees you. Throughout history, science has often danced at the edges of the unexplained, attempting to rationalize phenomena that defy conventional understanding. Shapeshifters, long relegated to folklore and superstition, have recently found themselves under the speculative lens of fringe researchers, those willing to entertain possibilities far beyond the boundaries of mainstream academia. One such hypothesis suggests that these beings may be the result of extreme genetic mutations, anomalies in human DNA that allow for rapid cellular reorganization. Proponents of this theory point to chimerism, a rare condition where an individual absorbs a twin in the womb, resulting in two distinct sets of DNA. Could an even rarer mutation push this further, enabling voluntary shifts in physical form? The idea gains eerie traction when considering certain medical oddities, like the case of a French woman diagnosed with vanishing twin syndrome in the 1970s, whose X-rays inexplicably showed skeletal densities fluctuating between scans. Then there's the quantum angle, championed by a small but vocal group of theoretical physicists. They propose that shapeshifters might exploit quantum tunneling, a phenomenon where particles pass through barriers they shouldn't, to rearrange their molecular structure. If consciousness itself influences quantum states, as some interpretations of the observer effect suggest, could a trained mind manipulate its own body at the subatomic level? The work of Dr. Hiroshi Matsui, a controversial biophysicist, explores this possibility, citing experiments where meditators allegedly altered their thermal signatures in controlled environments, though his findings have been widely dismissed as methodological flaws. Interdimensional theories offer another tantalizing explanation. Drawing from string theory's concept of higher dimensions, researchers like Dr. Lillian Voss speculate that shapeshifters could be entities native to a parallel reality, one where the laws of physics permit fluid morphology. Their appearances in our world might be brief, accidental breaches, glitches in the dimensional fabric. This aligns with reports from Skinwalker Ranch, where electromagnetic anomalies often precede sightings of mimic entities. In 2020, a team from Stanford's Applied Physics Laboratory recorded a brief but measurable gravity spike coinciding with a witness's claim of seeing a humanoid figure unfold into a quadrupedal form. The data, while inconclusive, hints at space-time distortions consistent with interdimensional crossover. Even neuroscience wades into the debate. Dr. Elias Carver's research on Capgras delusion, a condition where patients believe loved ones have been replaced by imposters, reveals how easily the brain's facial recognition systems can be hacked. His 2022 study demonstrated that electromagnetic pulses targeted at the temporal lobe induced transient face-shifting hallucinations in subjects. Could shapeshifters, whether natural or supernatural, exploit similar vulnerabilities? Indigenous accounts frequently describe these beings as feeling wrong before they're seen, suggesting a neurological intrusion beyond mere disguise. Cryptid biologists propose a more grounded yet equally unsettling theory that shapeshifters represent a relic hominid species, one that evolved camouflage abilities surpassing any known fauna. Dr. Richard Keller's work on octopus mimicry demonstrates how quickly cephalopods can alter their skin's texture and color. If a terrestrial organism developed comparable adaptive traits, along with advanced vocal mimicry, it might explain centuries of global shapeshifter reports. Keller's hypothesis gained fleeting credibility when a 1984 expedition in the Caucasus Mountains recovered a hair sample with chimeric DNA sequences, but the specimen vanished from a Moscow lab under suspicious circumstances. Skeptics, of course, counter these theories with psychological and sociocultural explanations. Anthropologist Dr. Maria Chen argues that shapeshifter lore emerges predictably in societies undergoing rapid upheaval, a coping mechanism for collective trauma. Her analysis of post-colonial indigenous narratives shows a spike in Skinwalker stories during periods of forced relocation, suggesting these beings embody the terror of unstable identity. Yet even she concedes that certain recurring details, like the ubiquitous glowing eyes reported across disconnected cultures, defy easy dismissal as mere projections. The most provocative synthesis comes from fringe parapsychology, which posits that shapeshifters exist in a liminal state between matter and thought. Drawing from Tibetan tulpa traditions and modern thought-form experiments, researchers like Dr. Aaron Petrovich suggest that sustained belief, especially when charged with fear or ritual, might inadvertently sculpt autonomous entities. If enough people envision a skinwalker, does the collective consciousness birth something that wears that expectation like a skin? Petrovich's neural mapping of self-proclaimed shapeshifter cultists revealed eerily synchronized brainwave patterns during rituals, patterns that, disturbingly, mirrored those of their alleged victims during encounters. What unites these disparate theories is their acknowledgement of a simple, humbling truth. Our current scientific framework might lack the vocabulary to fully explain these phenomena. Whether through genetic flukes, dimensional slips, or the raw power of belief, the shapeshifter persists as a challenge to our understanding, a living riddle etched in the margins of biology, physics, and human perception. And perhaps that's the most unsettling possibility of all, that science, in its quest to demystify the monster, might one day confirm what the elders have whispered all along: some doors should never be opened. Shapeshifter myths refuse to fade into history because they speak to something primal in the human experience, a collective dread that transcends culture and time. At their core, these stories aren't just about monsters. They're mirrors reflecting our deepest anxieties, the fear of betrayal, the terror of losing control, and the unsettling reality that danger often wears a friendly face. For indigenous communities, these legends serve as cultural cornerstones, reinforcing values of trust and reciprocity. When a Navajo elder warns that power corrupts, or a Cherokee storyteller describes the consequences of stealing another's essence, they're preserving more than folklore. They're encoding survival strategies into narrative, teaching each generation to recognize predators both supernatural and human before it's too late. Modern psychology reveals why these tales resonate so powerfully. The concept of predatory deception is hardwired into our instincts, the ability to detect when a smile doesn't reach the eyes or a voice carries false warmth. Studies show humans can subconsciously identify micro-expressions of malice in milliseconds, a survival trait shaped by millennia of evolution. Shapeshifter lore amplifies this instinct into myth, giving form to the ineffable sense that something is off about a person. This explains why so many contemporary encounters describe uncanny valley effects, figures whose movements are slightly too fluid, whose features seem to slip when viewed from the corner of the eye. Our brains are primed to spot these discrepancies even when we can't articulate why. The stories also thrive in periods of societal upheaval. Historian Dr. Elena Mendez notes that Skinwalker narratives surged during the Long Walk of the Navajo, when displacement and starvation eroded communal trust. Similarly, the Wendigo psychosis, once dismissed as superstition, is now recognized as a trauma response where isolation and scarcity warp perception. In an age of social media facades and AI-generated deepfakes, this ancient fear of deceptive appearances feels eerily relevant. We live in a world where identities can be fabricated with a few keystrokes, where predators lurk behind curated profiles. Is it any wonder tales of literal wolves in sheep's clothing still haunt us? Yet these myths offer more than warnings, they provide a framework for resilience. Anthropologist Dr. Javier Ortega's work with Lakota communities highlights how shapeshifter stories function as spiritual immune systems. By externalizing threats as monsters, cultures create psychological distance from real-world traumas like colonization or epidemic disease. The monster can be fought, outsmarted, or avoided through ritual. This narrative structure restores agency in the face of chaos, a coping mechanism as vital today as it was centuries ago. When Hopi parents teach children to recognize the signs of a pawaka, they're not just fostering caution, they're building mental fortitude, equipping them to navigate a world where danger doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. The digital age has only amplified these myths, morphing them to fit new fears. Online, where anonymity allows identities to shift with a click, Skinwalker legends find fresh, fertile ground. Creepypasta forums teem with stories of glitching avatars and chatbots that learn too quickly, while true crime podcasts dissect cases of serial imposters. These modern boogeymen tap into the same unease as their ancestral counterparts, the terror of not knowing who or what you're really dealing with. Even the terminology overlaps. Catfishing echoes the Cherokee Raven Mockers' stolen skins, and deepfake mirrors the Skinwalkers' stolen faces. The mediums change, but the message endures. Trust is a currency, and counterfeiters walk among us. Perhaps most compelling is how these stories bind communities together. Shared belief in the unseen creates invisible fences, cultural boundaries that reinforce collective identity. When a Dene family avoids traveling after dark or a Lakota hunter refuses to speak of certain things near water, they're not just following superstition. They're participating in a tradition that says, we are people who remember. In a globalized world where traditions erode daily, these myths become lifelines to heritage, whispered reminders of who a people are and who they must never become. The endurance of shapeshifter lore isn't about proving whether these beings exist. It's about acknowledging that the world is stranger, darker, and more wondrous than our science can yet explain. These stories persist because, in the end, they're not really about monsters at all. They're about us, our capacity for both cruelty and courage, our hunger for meaning in the chaos, and our stubborn refusal to stop watching the shadows for movement. As long as humans gather around fires, real or digital, the old warnings will echo through the night, urging us to look closer, dig deeper, and remember that some truths wear many faces. The stories of shapeshifter cults in Native American lore refuse to fade into obscurity, not because they're relics of a superstitious past, but because they tap into something far more unsettling about the human experience. These legends persist like embers in the dark, flaring up in modern encounters, whispered warnings, and even government documents that dance around the inexplicable. From the Navajo Skinwalkers' predatory cunning to the Cherokee Raven Mockers' hunger for stolen breath, these beings embody more than just monsters. They represent the terrifying possibility that some boundaries between human and animal, between the living and the dead, even between reality and myth, might not be as solid as we'd like to believe. What makes these accounts so compelling isn't just their supernatural elements. It's the consistency across centuries, tribes, and even continents. The same glowing eyes, the same unnatural movements, the same chilling sense of being studied by something wearing a mask. When a Lakota elder describes a Wanogi spirit mimicking a loved one's voice, and a Pennsylvania hiker recounts an identical phenomenon in the Appalachians, the parallels become harder to dismiss as coincidence. Even science, with its quantum theories and genetic anomalies, stumbles at the edge of this mystery, offering glimpses of explanations but never quite closing the case. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether these beings exist, but what their persistence says about us. Why do these legends surface most vividly in times of upheaval? Why do they evolve, adapting to every era's fears, from colonial violence to digital deception? The answer might lie in their dual role as both warnings and reflections. They remind us that power corrupts, that identity is fragile, and that some hungers, once awakened, can reshape not just the body but the soul. So here's where we leave you. In a world where deepfakes warp reality and AI mimics human voices, where trust feels increasingly precarious, how thin, really, is the line between the stories we tell and the truths we've yet to uncover? Have you ever felt that prickle on your neck, the unshakable sense that something in the shadows isn't what it seems? The comments are open. Share your encounters, your theories, or even your skepticism. Because if these legends teach us anything, it's that some questions don't have easy answers, but the act of asking them keeps the darkness at bay, at least for now.